Thanks very much, Miranda. This reminder, we'll be taking your calls for the next hour at 1-877-Newsmax. That's 1-877-639-7629. For more on this story, we're pleased to be joined now from Newsmax, Washington by retired Maryland Police Major Garland Nixon. He served 20 years in Maryland as an officer. From Newsmax, New York, we welcome the retired captain of the Linden NJ Police Department, Jonathan Parham. Jonathan's also a former SWAT commander for the Linden PD, and via Skype from the Big D, Dallas, Texas, the host of the talk show on 660 AM The Answer, my good friend Mark Davis. Mark is also the author of a new book due out next month, Upside Down: How the Left Turned Right into Wrong, Truth into Lies, Good into Bad. Gentlemen, we thank you for your time tonight. And Garland, let's start with you. You were there serving in Maryland for a couple of decades. In Dallas last night, 5 officers killed in the ambush. Is there any type of law enforcement training to prepare for the type of attack we saw last night in downtown Dallas?
No, there isn't. You know, I remember my first meeting with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, and the discussion was about just terrorist attacks. And one of the things that was made clear is this: in an urban environment, there is no tactical solution for an ambush-style attack. I mean, you know, from the perspective of ambushes, a police officer is always at all times in what could be considered a kill box or a kill zone. At all times, you're driving around, and if somebody wants to take a tactical position on a roof or whatever, they can shoot at you. So there isn't anything that police departments can do tactically to reduce the possibility of this. They're going to have to go to protest. They're going to have to go to do a lot of different things. They're going to have to put a lot of officers there, and you can't police every single roof all day long. So no, my long answer is no.
Understood, Garland. Let me turn to Jonathan Parham now. Jonathan, of course, you spent time as a SWAT commander with the Linden PD. Is there anything that should happen in terms of a change in training or tactics to help deal with these kinds of situations?
There is. I know that most departments do what's called an after-action report. What they do is they look at these incidents, they break them down step by step. We find out what went right, what went wrong, and what we could work on in the future, specifically via communications, tactical training, maybe equipment, all of these things. The first thing we want to do before we start taking any action is to look at what actually occurred, compare those incidents and those actions to best practices, see what other people have done. Someone's done what we are trying to do. Let's figure that out so we don't have to waste our time and we don't waste our energy, waste our money or our resources. So yes, we can actually do something, but it should always begin with taking a hard look at the incident, breaking it down, and training our personnel on the best response for that.
Mark Davis, as you were going on The Answer this morning, you had to take a hard look at Dallas the morning after. Tonight, how would you describe the mood in the city, and what is your takeaway in the wake of last night's tragedy, Mark?
If I can, JD, great to be with you and these other fine gentlemen. Let me take you through it chronologically. Last night, I sat in my home where I am now and watched this horrible story unfold and did the kind of talk show that we all do on Twitter when we're not actually on our shows. And the story just got worse and worse and worse. 1 dead, 2, 3. When I went to bed, it was 4. Woke up and it was 5. This morning, it's like it was a bad dream. Did this really happen? And of course, the awful truth was that it did. So the show that I do on 660 AM, The Answer, 7 to 10 AM, was sort of our community's first opportunity to come together via the electronic hearth. And you know a lot about radio yourself, and you know the function that talk radio can provide. And yes, there was plenty of anger. There was plenty of outrage at the hate speech of Black Lives Matter. And I provided a lot of that analysis, and listeners did too. But there was also the beginning of something that has settled over our city as this day comes to an end. And that is that phenomenon. We see it on a large scale on 9/11. We see it on smaller scales in various other tragedies. When humanity presents itself at its worst, sometimes it's an opportunity to see humanity at its best. In downtown Dallas, not 6 blocks from where this carnage took place last night, Mayor Rawlings and Chief Brown and some other folks in an interfaith community gathered for a prayer service at noon. And the coverage since then and the outreach since then and some of the social media since then has been about trying to find solutions so that we can end this horrific misunderstanding, because that's exactly what it is, this horrific misunderstanding.
And you know, Mark, you mentioned the prayer service, and as I was hearing you talk about that, I think about what I've learned, that prayer changes things, but prayer changes our hearts. And gentlemen, a couple of minutes remaining in this segment, reminding our viewers they can call us at 1-877-Newsmax. But I want to go back, and I'm sorry to do this, but I was just struck when I heard Attorney General Loretta Lynch earlier today. Yes, she expressed condolences to the families of the fallen, but she also proffered a note of encouragement to the protesters. Look and listen.
And to those who seek to improve our country through peaceful protest and protected speech, I want you to know that your voice is important. Do not be discouraged by those who would use your lawful actions as a cover for their heinous violence. We will continue to safeguard your constitutional rights and to work with you in the difficult mission of building a better nation and a brighter future.
A shout out to protesters. Hey, Garland, here's my problem. I understand First Amendment rights, but we know a lot of Black Lives Matter folks, a lot of people involved in that organization, in essence, are domestic terrorists. They're not peaceful protesters. What say you?
Well, here's what I think. A couple things. I agree with her, number one, for this reason. I think that when we see violence happen, when we see people act out in violence, what that should remind us is that it's best to talk with and work with people who are trying to achieve various goals in a peaceful way. You know, I always think back of the civil rights when there was Martin Luther King.
Sure, but
and then there were other people
Garland,
who wanted to act out in a violent
right.
way.
Look, I want to give
protesters were kind of victims themselves. Some of them were even shot.
Yes, and the irony is the cops stepped forward to protect them, even as they were saying derogatory things about the cops. Jonathan, final 20 seconds in this segment to you. Do you agree with Garland's position?
Sir, I agree that the constitutional rights should be protected, but the beautiful thing about law enforcement is that our subjective thought doesn't really matter. We're required to do a job, and I love the fact that so many different types of people can come into law enforcement and provide that protection. So no, I don't want to start segmenting how we should think. I do know that I understand how law enforcement should act. We should act in a responsible manner. We should protect people's rights. We should do our job.
And on that note, gentlemen, I will ask you to stay put. We will be back with more with these three fine guests and your calls. Welcome back. This reminder, you can join our conversation by calling in at 1-877-Newsmax. That's 1-877-639-7629. Let's continue now with our discussion. And for some perspective, let's take a look at the time President Obama has spent in office. When he was inaugurated back in 2009, I think we all hoped that he would help bridge a gap in race relations. But sadly, some of his comments appear to be doing the opposite. Here are some excerpts from our commander-in-chief that he uttered following some recent high-profile episodes.
I believe that I speak for every single American when I say that we are horrified over these events and that we stand united with the people and the police department in Dallas. There's a big chunk of our fellow citizenry that feels as if, because of the color of their skin, they are not being treated the same. But my main message is to the parents of Trayvon Martin. You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. So that we're guarding against not just racial slurs, but we're also guarding against the subtle impulse to call Johnny back for a job interview, but not Jamal.
Some comments from our president. Let's continue now with our panel. Again from Newsmax, Washington, retired Maryland Police Major Garland Nixon. Garland also serves as a radio talk show host. Just finished his program tonight, as a matter of fact. From Newsmax, New York, retired captain of the Linden NJ Police Department, Jonathan Parham. And from deep in the heart of Texas, specifically Dallas, my good friend, the host of the morning program On the Answer, Mark Davis. And Mark, I have to get your take on this. There's been some talk that the group Black Lives Matter should be designated a domestic terror group. Do you agree with that?
Domestic terror, these are words that have meaning. The guy shooting last night surely was a domestic terrorist, but I don't mind identifying it as hate speech because this is exactly what it was. And I'm a little tired of hearing about how peaceful the rally was last night. I could hold a peaceful rally next week and call it I Hate Jews. I could hold another peaceful rally the following week that says blacks are the problem in America, or let's get rid of the dirty Hispanics. And it would be peaceful, thoroughly peaceful. Peaceful is not just defined as the absence of people getting shot or beaten up. This was rhetorical violence. This was a dreadful, dreadful evening of hate speech that was designed to forward the horribly sick narrative that the president is leading us on, that there is some systemic, racist, roving pack of white cops looking to kill our black people. This is a damnable lie. We absolutely need constructive debate. You had it just right a few moments ago, twice in fact. We totally need constructive debate on the bad shootings, the justifiable shootings, and how to go about all that. But there is no place at the table of rational debate for people who arrive with the false preconceived notion that the cops are a racist horde.
Well, let's go to the phones and see what Americans watching Newsmax Prime tonight have to say. First to Milford, Ohio, for Larry. Larry, welcome to our program.
Hi, JD. How are you?
Okay, sir.
My question was a little broader, and I was thinking in terms of President Obama and Hillary Clinton and their divisiveness and how they really set out and actually made a science of dividing the country and pitting people against people.
Well, to be fair about it, Larry, wedge issues have been employed by members of both parties. I can say that having been a member of Congress, but I do understand your concern, especially with this right now. Now, Garland, I understand in addition to being a law enforcement officer and radio talk show host, you have been involved from time to time with the ACLU, and they defend the right of folks to say unpopular things. But what about the notion that wedge issues and divisiveness are adding to the problem rather than really having us talk it out?
Well, I've always felt like this. I don't think talking about cancer causes cancer, and I don't think talking about issues in our society causes the issues to expand. I think we have to be constructive in how we deal with them and how we address them. I think that a lot of what's interesting is that the comments that President Obama made that I hear that some people find objectionable, people in the black community kind of breathed a collective sigh of relief and said, okay, someone understands how we feel. So what we have is there's a wedge between, say, the black community and the white community in America as to how they see and understand our country and our society. And I think we need to understand each other. And as far as Black Lives Matter, I'll say this. Understand something. There is no such thing as Black Lives Matter. It's not an organization. It's a hashtag. The four of us tomorrow could call ourselves the Newsmax version of Black Lives Matter. So there's nothing there. It's just a title that people assume, a flag that people fly above them. So there's no organization that you could designate. It doesn't exist.
Well, Garland, I would go with the Newsmax Primettes, but let me go to Jonathan for just a second here. Jonathan,
I'm sorry.
What's okay, Garland? But we heard what Garland had to say. And Jonathan, I'm just kind of curious. So the president within the black community may be thought of as the empathizer in chief, as Garland points out. But Jonathan, let me ask you, the rhetoric is being interpreted as the notion that there is a systemic effort by white cops to target members of the black community. You're in law enforcement. Do you see evidence of that, Jonathan?
What I actually see is that there is as a result of all the police officers' actions, there's a reason why we get to where we get to. There's a reason, there's something that gets us to that defining moment where force is used or we're forced to make an option. And it's systemic. It is involved in our hiring, our training at the academy, our socialization, and the bureaucratic way that we handle our standard operating procedures. So yeah, there's a lot of things that go into that. To pin it down to one or two things, I think is a bit unfair and it's a bit myopic. I do know that speech does have the ability to cause problems. So when we talk about discussions, from a personal standpoint, I could say, listen, I'm all about discussions. I just like it to be a peaceful discussion where we're not going to have to call the police out to enforce some type of riot type of control. That's a bit much for me.
Amen. And even with the First Amendment, there is something known as fighting words in terms of the law. Let's get back to some words of wisdom from one of our callers to Leggett, Texas, for Sharon. Sharon, what's your take?
Hey, JD. Oh, I'll tell you what. My mother and father were World War II and Korea. My brothers and I were Vietnam. My nephews serve as the LT in sheriff's departments. I have the utmost respect for any and all law enforcement agencies. Any cop. Somehow it has to stop. If you know your tail light is out, go fix it. If you know you're making an improper lane change, try not to do it again. Be respectful at all levels.
Well, let me turn to your fellow Texan, Mark Davis. Mark, you talk to a lot of people day in and day out, and you get involved in discussions that can be passionate. And yet, I dare say you do not advocate violence or leave that floating out there. You can be provocative and peaceful at the same time. You're telling us last night what was going on in downtown Dallas was not particularly peaceful. It was provocative, and it proffered some of those fighting words.
It was incendiary. I mean, if I hold a peaceful rally, again, that's about hatred of Jews or hatred of blacks, if I don't hit anybody, does that mean that it's a calm and serene thing? And going back to what Garland was saying, listen, about black people and white people seeing things differently, are we to condescend to our black Americans? Hey, because you guys can't handle an actual chunk of accuracy in the truth, we're going to let you continue to believe that there are bands of roving racist white cops. And we have to let you believe that because we see things differently. This is insane. This is how we got here. We must insist that people of all colors work from the same set of facts. Namely, some cops are bad. Some shootings are bad, but anybody coming to the table to say that we have a massive epidemic of racist cops is a liar and must be identified as such.
Garland, do you care to respond to what Mark had to say?
Absolutely. I've done a lot of work on the issue of racism and bias. I would commend to any of my viewers, at Harvard, they have a number of tests called implicit association tests. So the mistake that's made often when it comes to the issue of race is that it's intentional, that people just say, you know what, I don't like black people or I don't like white people, I'm going to do this. What happens oftentimes is we have biases that we don't know about. We're more likely to be afraid of this group than that group, and we don't know about it. So if we discuss this issue and the issue of racism and the issue of bias as often and more often than not as unintentional biases that we don't know we have, then we don't have to have a roving band of bad cops and good cops. We don't have to have the hero-villain syndrome where you're either a bad guy or a good guy. We can say there are a bunch of good guys, but good guys have the ability to do bad things or things that maybe they shouldn't do because of the biases that they have.
Obviously,
and it's
gentlemen,
not as simple as
we are
heroes and
touching
villains.
this, and to my broadcast friends, the four-letter word time. That has gotten in the way, but I want to have you all back. Garland Nixon, Jonathan Parham, and Mark Davis. Gentlemen, thank you for a provocative, lively, thought-provoking discussion. Up next, Armstrong Williams as we continue.